Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. My name is Bryce Stewart. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Marine Biological Association in the UK and an Associate Professor at the University of Plymouth. So I'll be chairing the event today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here. So before I introduce each of our speakers, I would like to welcome Dr. Patrick Nedelec, who is the Science and Technology Counsellor at the French Embassy in the UK.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Bryce, for this short introduction. I'm really happy to join you live on the from the UNOC tree in Nice and to say a few words on behalf of the French Embassy in the UK, which is really happy to support the York Festival of Ideas and especially this roundtable. This UN Ocean Conference is a strong reminder of how urgent and global the challenges facing our oceans are, and how essential it is to bring together science, education, civil society, and diplomacy to shape collective responses. That's exactly the spirit of this conversation. It's a great opportunity to strengthen the link between our community across the channel and beyond, and to work together on what really matters, protecting our ocean for the future generation. A warm thanks for our colleague from Para Ocean Foundation for accepting our invitation to join today to these events. And your work continues to inspire actions and awareness worldwide. And I would like also to finish by thanks Joanne Concannon and Sarah Mitchell from the York Festival of Ideas and their team for all the work and making this discussion such an inspiring program. So I'm wishing you, all of you, a great session on oceans. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you for your support and the support of the French Embassy. So we have 4 panelists today, and so they are each going to introduce themselves, speak for about 5 minutes, and then we will have a panel discussion between them and between me and them. And then we will have time for questions and answers at the end of the event as well. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is André Abreu, who is the Head of International Policy at the Tara Ocean Foundation. Over to you, André.
Thank you, Brice. Thank you, Patrick, for the kind words. I'm glad to talk. I'm in Nice to the Nice last week with the One Ocean Science, more than 2,000 scientists, and now I'm here to follow the debates on the Blue Zone. That is just in front of the big plenary of the Blue Zone. We are a dozen of research vessels actually here in Nice to work for ocean sciences, and we are thrilled with the massive support for the ratification of the Treaty of the Conservation of the Biodiversity of the High Seas. We shifted from 29 countries to 51 today. So there's more than 60 heads of state and ministers here in Nice. And yes, working a lot to deliver ambitious decisions and pushing behind the governments to join some key issues as the moratorium for deep sea mining. But just a word about the UN Ocean Conference. I think it's worth to say that it's the first time we have an ocean conference with such a high-level attendance, more than 60 heads of state. It's a success. Ocean policy is carried in silos in the UN system. You have an ocean secretariat in UNDP. You have the regional programs with UNEP. You have the IOC in the UNESCO. You have the International Seabed Authority. You have the UN Oceans Office in New York. But this is the first time we have a global ocean conference with that dimension. It's the third one. But it's the first time we have this level of ambition and attendance from decision makers. In Lisbon 3 years ago, we were just coming out of the pandemics. The level of ambition was not that high. So it is really a pleasure to say that it's already a success, UNOC 3 in Nice. Thanks for the French government and the French diplomacy to carry these efforts to bring here the high-level representatives, heads of state, ministers. It's really a new kind of political ambition for the ocean, which is being designing here. Now I think with the permanent UNOC to be held each 3 years at this level of political participation, we can change the path of the decisions that sometimes take so long to be taken. So we are very happy that the BBNJ agreement is now being ratified for almost 60 countries, and most likely will be ratified before December. So the entry into force of the High Seas Treaty for the biodiversity will be next year, with the first COP being held in 2026, probably. We are seeing also a massive support for the moratorium against the deep sea mining. This is a very sensitive issue here in Nice. You may know that in the International Seabed Authority, we need to seek support for this moratorium till July. If it's not the case, the exploitation will start with the first project in Nauru Island with the Canadian company, the Metals Company. So UNOC is now a permanent forum, a permanent high-level summit, comparable to a COP, comparable to a climate COP, which was not the case before. And we are seeing for this deep sea mining, but also for the plastic treaty ambition. So document, it's not mandatory, it's a political declaration. The document is fine, but it's not binding. So it is not the main outcome of the UNOC. The main outcome is around these big processes that are finding here kind of echo and a kind of high level room to push this treaty, but also the global biodiversity framework, asking for 30% of oceans protected by 2030. So all these big processes, which are split in different UN agencies and programs, are together here. All the UN agencies are represented by their SGs here. We were with Ambassador Peter Thompson this morning on board. We are holding now a deep sea mining meeting. We held yesterday a meeting on Antarctica on the Kamilar urgencies to approve MPAs. So yes, very good representation. The science community is quite involved. NGOs from all around are here, from Greenland and Iceland to the Pacific Seas. And it's an amazing event. It's very hot in Nice. We are suffering a bit with the heat wave here. About 30 degrees in the sun. It makes it about 35 or 37. But yes, il fait beau, comme on dit en français, un bon français. Il fait très beau. We have a beautiful sun over Nice, and inspiring us for taking these important decisions for ocean's future. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, André, for setting the scene about what it's like in Nice. I think we're going to revisit that during the panel discussion as well, and about what this conference might achieve. I also love the setting you're in. I'm wondering if you're in Jacques Cousteau's old boat, the Calypso, but yeah, definitely the most appropriate setting for the meeting. Right, so we'll just, oh, there we go. Très bon. Perfect. Right, we shall move on now to introduce our second panelist, and this is Ishbel Matheson. She's the Chief Communications Officer with the Marine Stewardship Council. So over to you, Ishbel.
Thanks, Bryce. And I'm not in a boat in the harbour in Nice, but I am in an air-conditioned hotel room, so that's pretty pleasant to be in. And delighted to speak to you all. It's been a bit of a cavalcade here, I think, in Nice. André, you might also agree, with activists, scientists, governments from all over the world, everybody joining together for this mission on how to improve the ocean. I think what I'm going to talk to you and outline is issues that relate in particular to fisheries. I work for the Marine Stewardship Council, and that is an organization dedicated to ending overfishing, but also developing and promoting progress in sustainable fishing through our eco-labeling and certification program. So I think in terms of the couple of issues that have really been resonant here for fisheries, the big discussion about marine protected areas. Obviously, there's been a global movement to protect 30% of the seas by 2030. Obviously, for fisheries, that implicates them in terms of the types of restrictions on their fishing activities. I think we've seen a number of governments step up their commitments to MPAs here. Australia, over the last sort of 24 hours or so, has committed to highly protected areas over the next few years. And in a plenary this morning on sustainable fisheries, Vietnam was stepping up its commitment as well. In addition to MPAs, there's been another really high-profile campaign against bottom trawling led by some of the MPAs. Bottom trawling, of course, a hugely widely used practice in fishing. It accounts for about 1/4 of the world's wild seafood, including many of those popular species that we eat on a daily basis, like cod and haddock and so on. But if not managed properly, can be highly destructive, especially to sensitive habitats. So that's been a conversation here in Nice as well. And, you know, really being quite challenging, I think, for the fishing sector, some of those issues and how they've played out. Conservationists, I think, at this particular forum are very much on the front foot. It's appropriate that I am talking to you from Nice. Nice, of course, on the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean is actually one of the most overfished seas in the world. And that, in a nutshell, kind of articulates some of the problems that we have with global fishing and the efforts to get across, you know, how do we make progress in sustainable fishing? We heard quite a lot on that today in the plenary on sustainable fishing. I think delegates were keen, especially from the Fisheries and Agricultural Organization, were keen to stress progress is being made and that we shouldn't create an overly bleak picture. We had the EU Directors of Fisheries talking about how in 2009 there were only 9 stocks in Europe that were sustainable, and that had now changed to 60 stocks. And he said this progress is not recognized, but it is happening. We had another delegate talking about the importance of sustainable tuna stocks, especially for Pacific Islanders, and how there'd been a massive transformation in sustainability there. So a lot of calls for people to say progress is being made and that we need to recognize it. It's important not just for fishers to be incentivized to take steps into sustainability, but it's also really important because we need to be informed by the right policies and successes in order to set out frameworks to protect our oceans, but also enable us to fish and use those marine resources properly in terms of the seafood that we eat. And I think one of the most kind of stark calls was from the FAO Director General today, who said fisheries management is the best conservation tool. And I think that was quite a compelling statement from him. I think we did hear as well from some fishers. We heard from actually the general manager of a Cantabrian fishery, which is MSC certified, and they talked about the struggle that they've, you know, had to attain sustainability, closing their fishing grounds for 4 years, very much aligning with the MSC's fishery standard, and eventually becoming the first fishery to be MSC certified. But notably, Mair Garmendia also, she kind of outlined the impacts on communities, the needs for fishers to be recognized for this, did also talk about actually how heavy the bureaucratic burden was on her and her fears that actually young people would not go into the fishing industry in Europe, and yet we would still carry on eating fish. And that would just lead to more exports coming in and not supporting indigenous fishing industries in Europe. So really complicated pictures there. The other thing to stress is that the world's appetite for seafood is literally insatiable. The Director General at the FAO highlighted, if we are going to keep going with the current scale of increase in seafood consumption, wild seafood fisheries and aquaculture will have to increase production by 20%. So a massive challenge on how to do that sustainably. At MSC, we believe our market-driven model, where we get consumers, retailers, the supply chain to work together to drive, sustainable seafood products through the supply chain so that consumers have a choice. We think that's one model that's probably not recognized enough in government circles and discourses. But we now have a certified market for MSC certified products of 13.4 billion. And, the Cantabrian fishery was very much talking about how they took the journey, the steps into sustainability so they could open up those new export markets. So a complex picture around fisheries here, lots of ideas from government, scientists, management, authorities. But I think my big takeaway is the need to bridge conservationists so we can meet these twin challenges of how do we feed our growing global population with all the nutritious, food that the oceans offer, whilst also conserving the oceans and all their value and productivity for future generations as well. So how do we manage the resource management for conservation versus feeding our people?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ishbel. That was really good, fantastic insight. And I think we'll come back to that issue of balancing fisheries and conservation in our panel discussion. So moving on now to Professor Laura Robinson. Laura is a chair in Oceans, Climate and Society at the Department for Environment and Geography at the University of York, a former colleague of mine. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Really enjoyed the two introductions so far. And just to build on what Ishbel was saying, I'm actually sitting in Scarborough on the North Yorkshire coast. And it's very much a small fishing town where a lot of the heritage is there. There's a lot of emotional feelings about fish. And currently the stock that is caught is crabs and lobsters, where my husband, who grew up here, caught whitefish as a lad, essentially. And things have really changed. So it's interesting to see that evolution and how people view that in a first-hand way, and to work in and around that environment, especially as an academic who looks at these things in a slightly more theoretical framework. So as Bryce said, I'm Professor of Oceans, Climate and Society at the University of York. And I've been studying the oceans for 30 years, despite growing up in a rural setting, and I love them. They're endlessly fascinating. There's so much there in terms of exploration, excitement, science, and a way to protect our planet. So most of my research is actually focused on the passage of time and the history. And this is a session about the future of the planet, but there's a lot of lessons we can learn about from the past. How did we come from a glaciated planet into the modern day that we have? So I've really studied that. How quickly has the Earth changed? How quickly has the oceans changed? What have been the implications for climate and ecosystems? And I've been doing that, looking at timescales of tens of thousands of years. Really, really interesting. So my key message number one that I've learned is that the oceans are always changing, and they will always continue to change, but they're currently changing faster than they have ever changed in the history of the planet. So that's my first message. About 20 years ago, I moved to California because I got the opportunity to go down in the research submarine Alvin on an expedition. So I was like, this is the good reason to move countries. And it was amazing. It was the first time I got to see the deep sea with my eyes on it. And suddenly it was right there, and it wasn't just images. I could see deep sea corals that have been living there for 4,000 years. That's 2,000 years before, Jesus Christ and so on, and another 2,000 years. One animal's lived that whole time frame and seen all of that history in the deep sea, doesn't know what we're doing, just keep making a living down there in the deep sea. At the same time, I've seen all of these ferromanganese nodules that we're talking about for deep sea mining. It's a big topic in Nice at the moment. And these alien moon-like areas down in the deep sea that we're thinking could be a resource to fuel our future economy. Should we be doing that? Should we not? Something we could talk about. But I've seen those right up close, and they're fascinating, and they've developed over millions and millions of years. They grow so slowly. So I've been lucky enough to see all that. It's genuinely inspiring to go miles below the seafloor and see these huge reefs teeming with life. Really, really very different. So my key message number 2 is that there's huge unknowns in the deep sea. There's so much to explore. Every time you go down there, you can find a new mountain, you can find new species, and you can see things that inspire you. So we should keep exploring and get that excitement from the oceans, because there's so much. So I mentioned that I've studied a lot corals in the deep sea. That's been a big area of expertise for me. Absolutely amazing. They're not just in the Barrier Reef, they're all over the deep sea. They're growing in Antarctica, they're growing off the coast of the UK. But I've been lucky enough to go down and see them, miles below the sea surface. And even down there, they have microplastics in there. Even there, you can see trails from trawling that happened decades ago, because it takes so long for these ecosystems to recover, and we don't really know how they reproduce or how quickly larvae can get back there. So big unknowns. And there's big changes in the food that the deep sea gets, because it's coming from the surface as we change the climate. So my key message number 3 is it's all out there to explore, but we are influencing the deep sea, and we're not always influencing it very wisely, and it's time to think about that. So in 2018, I had a bit of a change of heart, and I thought, I've done all this academic research, I've seen things that nobody else has seen, and that's been a really wonderful thing to do. But I need to start to take some action myself, because I've got to do something, and I've got to look to the future and what we can do. So I actually started with my husband, who's a seafarer and an ex-fisherman, a small company to look at how we could use regenerative aquaculture for the good of the ocean. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. It's been genuinely exciting to bring together a small community here in Scarborough, think about all the science I know, think about all the things that he's learned in his life as well, and pull loads of people together to start to do this. And the thing that's got me really excited about it is that we've started to grow seaweed here in the North Sea in a relatively small area, but the life that it's brought back is amazing. We've got, so many new species growing. We've got kittiwakes everywhere. There's dolphins and seals. And this is just a small effort we've made as a small company here in Scarborough. So at the same time as actually enhancing biodiversity in a small area, we're taking up carbon, removing pollution, and there's jobs actually and opportunities for diversifying the fishing community that are finding it difficult to find new challenges. So my key message from what I've learned from doing that, my last key message, is that we actually can all do something. We've all got skills and expertise, and we talk a lot and we study it, but you can take action. You just have to be a bit brave and give it a try and use all your knowledge and your connections, and you can start to make a difference. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm first of all very jealous about you going down in Elven. I think that's all every marine biologist dream. But also, great stuff on the Sea Grown initiative. I can highly recommend the Sea Grown seaweed seasoning. Brings new life to every pasta dish and seafood dish I've ever had. So yeah, put that on your shopping list. Right, we are running a little bit over time, but I don't think that's a problem, because we're hearing lots of really fascinating thoughts. And just to say, don't forget to the audience, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom, and we'll come back to those at the end of the webinar. So last but not least, we have Doug Mair, who is a professor of glaciology at the University of Liverpool. So over to you, Doug.
Thanks very much, Bryce, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. As a glaciologist, I might seem somewhat of an interloper on the discussion about oceans, but my main focus is looking at the interaction between the oceans and the ice, particularly in the polar regions of the planet. So I just wanted to talk briefly about that. There are a lot of interconnections between the Earth's cryosphere and the Earth's ocean, none more so than in the polar regions. And the oceans have a big impact on glaciers and ice sheets. But I want to just talk about 4 ways in which the ice sheets and oceans are important for the oceans. So just that one-way connection. And probably the most obvious kind of thing. So the first thing is global ocean volume and sea level. And so the growth and decay of the Earth's continental scale ice sheets and glaciers is one of the primary controls on the amount of water in the oceans and the impact this has on global sea level. So we've seen from the maximum at the last glacial maximum about over 20,000 years ago, the sea levels were about 120 meters globally lower than they are now. So they've risen a huge amount as the major ice sheets, particularly over North America and over Scandinavia, have retreated away over that period. Sea levels rise dramatically as a result. And of course, we're still seeing with the current episode of global warming driving sea levels up at rates that haven't been seen for many, many thousands of years. So that's the first thing. And so obviously, if you're thinking about impacts of changing sea levels on the sort of continental shelf areas where a lot of the Earth's marine biodiversity is, impacts on corals and things like that, that's a significant factor. The second major impact that the glaciers and ice sheets have on the oceans is through ocean circulation patterns. And a lot of those are driven by temperature of the ocean and the salinity of the ocean. So as ice sheets and glaciers grow and decay, they change the temperature and the freshness of the oceans, because of course glaciers and ice sheets are freshwater. So whether that freshwater is coming from the melting of the ice sheets directly and vast rivers of freshwater being deluged into the coastal polar regions, or whether it's through the breaking up of vast icebergs which can float many hundreds and thousands of miles from where they're formed, that influx of cold fresh water can have a major impact on ocean circulation. And we know that because it has done very dramatically in the past, particularly during the glacial periods when the North American ice sheets and the Finno-Scandinavian ice sheet were breaking up. They at times actually caused significant weakening or disruption or even stopping some of the major ocean circulations that bring heat to large regions, particularly in the northern hemisphere. So there's a lot of research, ocean scientists working with glaciologists at the moment to try and see whether, although we don't have those huge ice sheets over North America and Scandinavia anymore, we still have the Greenland ice sheet, which is a large ice mass, which is losing fresh water into the northern Atlantic at the moment. What sort of impacts might that have on ocean circulation and therefore the consequent heat transfer to particularly Northwest Europe that would happen if that was disrupted? So that's an interesting topic, which of course has implications for marine biology ultimately. The third point I want to talk about is the impact of that same freshwater on primary productivity in coastal regions adjacent to ice sheets. And there are a whole number of ways which we might discuss about how changing ice sheets changes the nutrients that are coming in, both the balance of the different types of nutrients that are coming off the terrestrial catchments, if they're glaciated catchments, and those are retreating. Do we see a change in the types of nutrients, in the fluxes and the volumes of nutrients going into those coastal shelves and fjords, which are such an important part of the generation of primary productivity, which gives rise to phytoplankton and then to higher trophic level species. And so we're really trying to understand what will the changing behavior of the ice sheets as they move from being what we call tidewater glaciers to land terminating glaciers if they retreat onto land, or if they break up into icebergs over very quick timescales. What sort of impacts might that have? And in some parts of the world, although quite localized, there's a major impact on the economic resources that communities rely on for marine resources. Other ways is the turbidity of glacial meltwater can flush into these areas and can actually reduce primary productivity by blocking light to the key kind of photic zone, as it's called, a few tens of meters below the surface. So there's all these kind of perhaps unanticipated impacts that changing glaciers can have on the oceans and the marine productivity in them. And finally, just to think a bit more about the human impact, we're seeing a lot of ice retreat, both sea ice and glacier ice, in these polar regions of the world. And as we know, it's raising the political temperature, because these are economically sensitive parts of the world in terms of not just marine resources, but resources in the sea and in this kind of the landscape that's revealed by the retreating ice. And so, and also as the sea ice retreats, there's the potential for new global international shipping routes coming through the polar regions, particularly in the Arctic. But if that happens, it's also likely to be happening at a time when there is mass production of icebergs from retreating tidewater glaciers. So we've got it's a potential there for high risk to international shipping, as we all know the story of the Titanic. But that's a kind of a lesson for us, perhaps, that we need to take very seriously going into the future. If there's increased shipping, if there's increased coastal infrastructure in these regions, and if communities are reliant on this for their economic development in those regions, they're also living alongside potentially an increasing risk from icebergs, which is something which needs to be understood and quantified and very much brought into the conversation, because we don't want to increase the risk of global shipping disasters and pollution events and such like. So glaciers are having a major impact in that respect as well. So those are just 4 ways in which both in the sort of local communities, more regional scale, and also different time scales, that glaciers and ice sheets are indeed affecting marine environments around the world. So hopefully that's something else we can throw into the mix in our discussions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Doug. And I think, that wraps up our introductions from our speakers. We are certainly privileged to have such a diverse range of experts. I mean, we've literally covered most of the ocean, I think, from the deep sea up to what's going on land in terms of the glaciers. So now we're going to have a panel discussion for about 20 or 25 minutes. And I think I'm going to start with a big question. And when I first started, not long after I'd got my PhD, I started working on marine protected areas, so in the early 2000s. And I think this was the first time we saw some of these global commitments towards targets. We're going to put X percentage, in a protected area. We're going to stop biodiversity loss. And then since then, I've been teaching university students now for over 20 years, which is a bit scary. But one of the things I do in my lectures is I frame the lectures around these global commitments. And, for example, I remember the 2010 one, which was we're going to stop all biodiversity loss by 2010. And then we obviously had other ones in, going forward, conventional and biological diversity targets for 2020. Now we've got a new set for 2030. So my lectures would sort of, building up to these dates, we'd look at it and how progress was going. And then afterwards, it would be, well, we missed that target. What about the next one? And then, of course, we missed that one as well. In fact, I think, as far as I know, the world has missed every single environmental target that it's ever set, pretty much, and certainly in terms of the headlines on biodiversity loss and climate change. So, the question is, when we set these new targets, are we just moving the goalposts, or are we going to see another set of targets in 2030 for what we're going to do by 2040 and still not get there? So I guess, especially for the people in Nice, and we'll start maybe with you, Andre. Do you think things are different this time? Are these big conferences like what's going on at the moment actually leading to concrete change? And, how useful are they, I guess? Is this really how we move the agenda forward? So start with you, Andre, and then maybe we'll cross to whoever else wants to jump in.
No, I'm concerned with the time and the slow path of the decisions that are taken in the UN system. Of course, I'm following this BBNJ treaty since 13 years now. So since 2011, we are negotiating this text, which are now being ratified. So more than 15 years to go. And of course, it's slow, and we are disappointed when it goes so slowly. But let's just remind that the Convention of the Law of the Sea that was written and adopted in 1973 was entered into force in 1994, so 21. And so it's when you go to international binding instruments, I mean, it's quite slow because states must ratify, and it takes time because it has a direct impact on the administration decisions, etc., economic decisions, etc. But I do think that we are living a special moment. I mean, let's say that this success of Nice to gather more than 60 heads of state is a clear response for what some countries, especially the United States, are proposing as a step back. I mean, we need to believe in multilateralism more than ever. We need to believe in science more than ever. It's not an option. Ocean biodiversity is under threat, and it's not an option. So I think, of course, we are disappointed when it goes so slowly, and we are here to push to these decisions to be taken quickly. But I think it's an historical moment to reaffirm our belief in science, to reaffirm that climate change is already impacting. I was just this morning receiving Inuit representatives from the Arctic Council, and it's so sad what is happening with these communities in the Arctic. It's there. I mean, it's a reality. So we have no choice. We have to continue to fight. We must believe in multilateralism, and more than ever, I think we need to build coalitions to push for important decisions to be taken quickly.
Thank you very much. And yeah, what you say is really interesting. I think I've asked a number of successful marine scientists, or particularly marine conservationists, what's the one key quality that you need? And they all say perseverance. So I think that's, these things do take a long time, but we just got to keep going. Ishbel, I think maybe you would like to jump in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me here is just the range of treaties and agreements that are either under discussion or being brought through for ratification. I think BBNJ has been the one, the High Seas Treaty, that everybody's really, the French government has very much focused. It wants to see the ratification of that coming through at the conference. But we also have the plastic treaties. We've got movements on MPAs. We've got, a priority for more finance to go in to ocean-related issues. So I think one of the challenges in the ocean space is there are so many different processes and priorities and different interests that, in a way, this conference really brings it home that there isn't a Paris Treaty, for example, on climate change, where it's one goal, one target. There are a number of different treaties as being addressed in a different way by the international community. And I do think one of the big challenges that we're going to see over the next few years, and we are already seeing actually, is that the pace of change of that multilateral system and the ability to drive change through policy making over years, we now have a system, we now have a reality in the ocean and on Earth that the actual biological effects of climate change are actually going much faster than perhaps our that collaborative rules-based system can deal with. And I was just really struck by that today. There was a delegate from the Pacific Islands in the fisheries plenary today, and they were talking about how they were losing 30% of their tuna stocks because the tuna were moving out of their EEZ. And for those islanders, that's an immense economic resource that they have and can use for development, for nutrition, and so on. And so the kind of concern, I think, with all of this is, with all of the proliferation of the topics and treaties is it going to be up to the speed and rapidity of the challenge that we're seeing coming from climate change in the ocean?
So yeah, I absolutely agree that's it's a really key topic in terms of, I think if you model the marine environment and look at the responses of individual species to things like warming or acidification, the models will tell you things are going to change in these kind of straight lines, linear changes. But what we're actually seeing quite often already is really dramatic things. So just where I'm working now off the southwest coast of the UK, we have this enormous increase in octopus. Now, no one really predicted this. And it's you know, it's hard to know for sure what the cause is, but it's almost certainly related to climate change. The octopus boom is in warm water species. And, you know, this is completely changing, like, not just the marine ecosystem, but the fisheries as well. So these octopus are getting into the crab and lobster pots and basically eating everything. And, you know, so now the fishermen are starting to catch octopus instead of crabs and lobsters. But what about when the octopus are gone? Because they don't last for very long. They only live 1 or 2 years. You know, then what will we do, and what will come next? And I think this is why, you know, the way that we interact with the marine environment, we manage human activities, needs to be more dynamic than ever before. So, yeah, does anyone else want to jump in at this point? Laura?
Yeah, I did want to. It's really interesting because I think you've got to have these big, inspiring goals to go for, and you've got to have the countries behind the feeling of it. But for me, it seems like what's missing is that step between the high level ambition and actual practical steps to make things happen. And that includes policies on the ground, the funding, be that governmental or other, and how that really translates. And education's a key part of that, which is where you actually started, Bryce, about bringing students in. But it needs to not just be university students, it needs to be people with practical skills who understand the oceans to fix it. We've got so many fishers all around the world who are losing opportunity, but they know the sea, they have boats, and they can get out there. So rather than what we seem to be doing in the UK, which is paying people not to do things, is pay them to do things that actually give back.
Yeah.
So I think we need policy frameworks that push that forward and don't say go ahead on one side, stop on the other side, so that all of us can actually get out there and actually make the difference, rather than perhaps just talking in the mid-level. But I think you need the high-level talks to get everyone behind it, but there's a big gap between that and what's happening, I would say, on the ground, but obviously in the sea. So.
On the ocean, yeah, in the sea. Yeah, I guess a quick question from your experience, Laura, in terms of sea grown. Are some of your staff former fishermen? I mean, I guess you said your husband was quite involved in fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband started fishing in the white fishing fleet when he was 8, which probably isn't so much allowed now, right?
Sure it's not.
But he even had to leave Scarborough to go out and find other jobs outside Scarborough, because that was disappearing a long time ago. But yeah, we have several ex-fishers on our staff, and it's great because they've got those hands-on practical skills. They can get out there. And I think, Ishbel, it was you who said that young people aren't going into fishing anymore. And you definitely see that here, because there's not a voice of hope in it. Everyone says, oh, don't fish, you can't fish. But if you could say, you could fish like this, or you could take part in this, people might start to join it again, and you'd bring people with fresh ideas and new ways to do things. So I think that education and here's some good things you can do would really, really help.
Yeah, and I guess what you've seen is is in this case fishermen transitioning into a related industry. Now, that's not going to be for everyone. I think fishermen have quite unique personalities, and some of them may be suited to aquaculture and some not, but at least there are options. So yeah, that's definitely encouraging. Do we have any other further comments on this topic, or shall I move into something? Yeah, Doug, come on.
Just very briefly. I mean, I do think these meetings are valuable at the high level, because whilst it's easy to point to the missing of targets and things like that, some issues just won't move at all without multilateral agreements. And so this is the forum in which those come together. The other thing is, just as there is another gap, Laura was talking about one gap there between the kind of big action and the local action. The other gap is between where we are now with where we would have been if we hadn't done anything. So we really have to look at that as well, and that goes for the COP conferences as well as the new UN Ocean conferences. You know, we mustn't get overly despondent as a community as well, and that's so important for encouraging other people, you know, next generation to take up the mantle and keep pushing this forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think you know, there's a lot of psychology behind this. You got to set your goals high, or you won't really go that far. If you think about professional sportsmen, you know, I'm sure Carlos Alcaraz didn't think it would be good if I could be quite a good tennis player. He wanted to be world #1, you know. That's what he is. So not saying we all need to be world number one, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of value in setting goals high and moving the agenda forward. So we've got a little bit more time for panel discussion. One of the things that actually, while you're still on the line there, Doug, I'll start with you on this, is talking about climate change. And I know that the Marine Stewardship Council that Ishbel works for recently did a survey of scientists around the world and said, what do you think is the most pressing issue facing the oceans? And climate change came out on top, if I'm not mistaken, Ishbel. Other things like overfishing and pollution were quite close behind. But climate change, we've talked a little bit about it, it's causing these unexpected, unprecedented changes. But I think both you and Laura have quite a bit of experience of looking at how things changed in the past, maybe not because of human activity, but because of sort of larger scale planetary changes. How useful is studying what's happened in the past for trying to predict what's going on in the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's quite a sort of fundamental question to a lot of earth sciences in general, in terms of not just understanding for the sake of knowledge, but understanding to help us project what might happen in the future. As far as the sort of ice-ocean interactions, I just briefly mentioned it in my introduction, but we do know that there have been these very dramatic changes in global ocean circulation in the past due to the advance and retreat of ice sheets. Most dramatically, perhaps, for the sort of Northwest Europe, and would be the shutting down effectively of what's popularly known as the Gulf Stream during the deglaciation, actually, of the Northern Hemisphere. And whilst that was possible because there were these vast ice sheets, like the Laurentide ice sheet, which covered all of Canada and a large chunk of the USA, and there was one that covered most of Scandinavia and indeed the United Kingdom, and Ireland was largely covered by an ice sheet. Those have gone now, but we've still got Greenland there, and what happened to Greenland during the last interglacial, which if you go back 130,000 years, which is potentially a better analog for our current situation than the last ice age, there's a lot of interest in what happened to Greenland, how much ice was lost from Greenland then, what impact did that have on the global ocean, where's the evidence for that in the ice core record, in the ocean core record, can you get this sort of dramatic change in the circulations happening during an interglacial, which is what we live in now? These are really fundamental questions which are posed to us from looking at the geological record, if you like, the past, but they have what happened then will certainly give us insights into what could happen in the future. Just one final thing. So in the last interglacial, the temperature got up to about 4 to 6 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels. So that's a future which is not that far ahead for us, and we know that global sea levels averaged across the planet were sort of between 4 and 9 meters higher than they are now. We know that that there were the implications of that for coastal regions must have been vast. So it certainly helps set the context, and it helps us to run models. And if you can run models of the climate system and they do well with hindcasting, as we call it, so it's like if they do well with understanding what happened in the past, then those are probably the best models to give us much more robust projections about what might happen in the future.
Very interesting. Thank you. Laura, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I could just very quickly. That's really excellent thoughts there. And I think I said in my intro, and it's really, really important that we've seen all these changes happen in the past, and you can learn a lot from them. But what's happening now is pretty unprecedented in terms of mass extinctions, in terms of the rate of sea level rise. I mean, I talked about the study of corals that I've done in the past. And the reason we do it, because in the deep sea, they grow these calcium carbonate skeletons, and you can look at what's happened in the deep sea on really fine timescales in the past, but nothing happens as fast as it is today. So that's really important. And then what Doug was saying about models, the models that we use today for looking at the future find it really difficult to recreate things like the shutdown. It wasn't really a shutdown, but the big changes we've seen in circulation in the past. And if they're not doing that, it doesn't give you that much confidence for them to model catastrophic events in the future. They can model gradual changes, but they don't do things like, you use the example of octopuses. They don't bring these sort of unexpected things. You just don't see them in the models because they can only do so much. So I think we do learn a lot from the past, but what we're going into is quite different.
Yeah, I think that's really key point, and maybe something that links to something I'm a big fan of, is that the people who are out there on the ocean, whether they be fishermen or seafarers or even just members of the public, have a really key role to play in all of this. Because with the octopus explosion, that was documented by fishermen. They saw it coming. In fact, now you talk to them more, they knew possibly last year that it was going to start to come. You talk to scuba divers and they go, well, I saw these octopus breeding last year. I've never seen that before. There's a guy who I work with, Keith Hiscock, who's been diving for 50 years, and he's like, I've never seen the things I'm seeing now. And I think that's where maybe even if the models can't predict these dramatic changes, if you have people, in this case with eyes on the ocean, that can be really valuable, as long as the managers can respond quickly enough to these sort of unexpected events. Right, so we're getting towards the end of the panel discussion, but I'm just gonna close with something hopefully a bit fun, a bit interesting, but hopefully a bit insightful. I'm going to go around each of the panelists. I want you to answer this question: are you feeling optimistic, pessimistic, or uncertain about the future of the ocean? And if you could just give your answer in about 1 minute, that would be appreciated. So let's start with you, André. So how are you feeling about the future of the ocean?
I'm optimist. We are getting to the protection of the high seas with the half our planet, 70% of the ocean. We do hope these MPAs in the high seas to be implemented soon. And I think here in the Mediterranean, we see positive changes. Marseille, the Calanque de Marseille 20 years ago were really in the bad stage concerning ecological state of the waters. Things are going better. I think we are seeing some trends on the positive side, but of course climate change is terrible. The plastic production have to be reduced, otherwise it would be a massive income of plastics in the next 20 years. But we keep optimistic. I think this summit here in Nice is a success, thanks to France and Costa Rica to big this ambition. And yes, we'll finish the week. Hope to have this good announcements for Friday, and keep fighting and keep pushing. We can't stop. We don't have a choice.
Great stuff. Thank you, André. Right, Ishbel, you next.
Well, it's my birthday today, so you got to be optimistic on your birthday,
Happy
right?
birthday. Absolutely.
No, I'm in the optimistic camp as well. I think we know more than we have done at any point in history. We've got better tools than we've had at any point in history. We kind of know what needs to be done, and I do think the spots of progress and the examples of progress that we have, we should be talking about them more, because I think the worst thing about one of these global problems is defeatism, just thinking it's too big, nothing can happen. So we need to really shout from the rooftops when we've got great examples of either biodiversity replenishment or fisheries coming back and so on. So that would be my 1 minute take on it. I'm an optimist. We know more, we can do more. We should say what we're doing well already.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ishbel. Right, Laura, your chance.
I feel like philosophically, and I'm a geologist by training, the oceans are going to be there whatever we do, and they're big, and they're going to last a lot longer than us. So they're going to be fine in the end, but they're not going to look like we think they are now, unless we actually act now. But we are an incredible, whatever you want to call a species. That's it. And we can do incredible things. So if we actually act, and all of us act to the greatest extent we can, then we can keep them like they are now and make them even better. So we should do that, and we can do it. So optimist.
Perfect. All right. Okay, Doug, let's see. I feel like you're under a bit of pressure to be
Yeah, a
positive as
bit of
well,
pressure.
but
Well,
feel
I'm gonna,
free to speak your mind.
of course, yeah, and coincidentally, it's my birthday as well today. So
Oh,
there we go.
wow.
That's quite
Happy
quite
birthday
fluky.
as well.
Thank you, and happy birthday, Ishbel. So yes, one ought to be optimistic. I guess being a glaciologist, the first thing people tell me is, "Oh, are there any left?" You know, and it is very sad to see the demise of glaciers and ice sheets. And given the nature of their behavior, that demise will continue for probably generations to come. Right, so that's sad. And that changes habitats as well as the warming of the oceans and some of the other things we've been hearing about, and there will be friends that we lose on the way. There'll be species that can't cope, can't adapt quickly enough, and so we will, as a civilization, will be poorer for that, whether that's economically or just philosophically. But let's be optimistic. We can slow the rate of change. I genuinely believe we can do that. And again, as I was saying before, if we look at what would happen if we hadn't done anything over the last 50 years or so, we would be in a much worse position. And we can, hopefully, by doing that, we can buy ourselves time, and we will hopefully be able to come up with mitigations, ways to adapt. New approaches and new understandings, new knowledge will come. Again, the gap between what we knew 50 years ago and what we know now is utterly vast, and we can only hope that what we'll learn in the coming decades, as long as we get the support and people keep appreciating the importance of that, will lead to discoveries and understanding that we should give us grounds for optimism that we can avoid the worst consequences.
Brilliant. Right. Well, we're all optimists. For what it's worth, I'm also an optimist. I think you have to be. You have to set your sights high. And as I think it was Laura said, we can all do something about these issues, but some of the biggest decisions are also made by politicians and by the private sector, by businesses as well. So my little catchphrase to people is, vote and shop and do business carefully. Think about the outcomes of who you're supporting, who you're giving your vote or your business to. Right, so we just now have about 15 minutes to go through the questions from the audience. So they've been building. Thank you very much. So I'll just take a look at them now. Just going from the top. Actually, these first two are quite related, so I'm going to ask them as one question. So the first one's anonymous. How interconnected is marine conservation and river health management, sewage regulation across the globe? And then the other question, which is very related, from Nicola Drew. I'd like to ask a general question about the relationship between sewage created by human activity, which has then been dispersed or dumped into rivers by water companies, for example, in the UK. Those of us in the UK know all about that. Does this have an impact on the oceans more generally, or are the negative impacts only really experienced locally in the rivers? And how can consumers help to lower our pollution impact on the sea? So who wants to take that one on? So it's basically about effects of pollution, I guess, in land and then transferred via rivers into the ocean. Any volunteers?
I think you're best placed for that one.
You think I'm best?
Bryce?
Okay. Well, thanks, Ishbel. It is your birthday, so I'll let you get away with that one. Yes, it is very, very important, I think, for a couple of reasons. So, there's a phrase that all rivers lead to the sea. That's not quite true, but it is true that almost all of the particularly plastic pollution that ends up in the ocean, certainly the vast majority of it comes from land, and it comes from rivers. And that is very much the same with things like excess nutrients and sewage, and then not just the sewage itself, but the other chemicals that are often mixed in with it. These can be sometimes sort of toxic industrial chemicals, but also pharmaceuticals. We're ending up in some parts of the world with extremely high levels of things like antibiotics or painkillers or even antidepressants, which are known to be affecting marine life. And on the other side of that, a lot of the biodiversity in the ocean, and certainly the lot that matters most to human societies, is in that coastal zone. So we definitely are having a very significant impact on that. And that's why we do need to remember that these systems are connected, you know, and I think that's often neglected, that really strong connection between the land and sea. There's all sorts of ways that, you know, it can be helped by changes in agricultural practice, by even things like, you know, microplastics from tire particles wash off roads into drains and then end up in the sea and all this stuff. So I think we definitely need to remember those connections, to recognize them. They can have very negative effects. We can see, for example, with excess nutrients, this explosion in algae, which then eventually dies and sinks to the bottom, decays and uses up all the oxygen and creates these coastal dead zones, which, you know, almost nothing can live in. And that's, you know, I could talk on and on about this. What can we all do as consumers? Obviously, we can do things about our waste and our plastic pollution and our disposal of rubbish, including drugs, you know, take them back to the pharmacy. And we can also keep lobbying our water companies and politicians to do something about some of the bad practice that's going on. Right, let's move on to try and answer a couple more questions. So this one is also anonymous. Do you think the UK will actually ratify the High Seas Treaty by the end of the year? And why will it take so long? So maybe not just thinking about the UK, but if we ask Andre, why do you think it takes countries so long to do these things? You know, I heard this in the media as well. It said, oh, we're going to ratify the treaty by the end of the year. So why can't you just sign it today? You know, if that's what you're going to do, let's just do it. What is the delay here?
Yes, thank you, Bryce, for the question. Is a matter of translating this international binding agreement to national law, and states have to measure the level of investment to make the compliance pipeline, for instance, for the research aspects. So basically, northern countries, UK is concerned about the impact of this agreement. Of such a binding agreement can take some years when you go to impact of this text to national bodies. So I think it's a bit normal.
Okay.
But we can accelerate, and the Paris Agreement that was ratified in less than 1 year is really the success story about ratification, because there were big push behind it, and so we hope UK will ratify till December, and the entry into force will be early next year.
Okay, fingers crossed. Thank you. Right, here's an interesting one. This is from Lydia. So what would or might happen if we could magically leave the oceans completely alone, say no fishing and no powered boats for 10 years? How far would or might the ocean restore? And would it be easy to keep what we take within sustainable limits if we resumed fishing? So I'm going to throw that to you, Ishbel. Ignore the fact that, like, there's lots of issues with doing that. It's a thought process.
So I love questions like that, because actually they come up quite a lot in relation to fishing. We had an event yesterday and exactly the same question came up. I think it's this idea if we left the oceans alone, it could replenish, it could, you know, it would become this sort of almost this pristine environment untouched by human hand or, you know, endeavor. I think the reality is that, you know, and that also comes through in this conference, is that there are many human interactions with the ocean. Fishing is one, but wind farms, deep sea mining, and so on. But just to kind of narrow in on the fishing piece, I I think one of the challenges is that, you know, we do know that if we manage fish stocks correctly, they can be sustainably managed. And just to give you some breaking news that I've been checking on my phone as we've been speaking, the FAO
Brilliant.
have just published the latest data. They're actually doing a different kind of survey this year with a new methodology, bringing in lots more of the global fishing stock. So instead of looking at 500, they're looking at 2,500. So massive accuracy about what's going on. And what it does show is huge regional variation. So there's stats for Northeast Pacific, for example, that 92.7% of those stocks are sustainably managed. But in the Southeast Pacific, you've got only 46% of stocks sustainably managed. So like huge variations regionally. And I think the big benefit of this new data, we were talking about the value of data and analysis earlier. The real benefit of this new approach and new data is we know where to concentrate efforts. You know, we know where to look in terms of really trying to make impact and transform fisheries and embed those, you know, those principles of sustainable fisheries management with governments, but also fisheries on the water. So encouraging, you know, data information gives us, you know, a really good bedrock on where we can focus our attention going forward.
Yeah, that's a really key point, and I look forward to looking at that as well. And I think that variability in both the sustainability of fisheries and also how they operate is often lost in headlines. You know, and even around the UK, we have such a diversity. We have, you know, everything from somebody in a rowing boat, literally, to a 250-meter super trawler, and even the super trawler, like for example, the ones fishing in the North Sea. They're actually very tightly managed, you know, and they're fishing in areas where you couldn't go out in anything much smaller. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. Like, and this is really, it's a really key message. But I think, and also, you know, highlighting these regional differences is really important, because even in the places where things are not so great, there's probably things we can learn from each other. Sometimes you can learn from what's gone wrong and use that to inform other areas and vice versa. Just quickly, because I have done research on what happens, not on a global scale, but on a small scale when you leave an area completely alone from fishing. So I've been working up on the Isle of Arran in Scotland for over 15 years, and there's a few different protected areas. One of the small ones is completely no fishing. Now, some of the stuff that happens is pretty obvious, right? The key species that used to be fished, they go up in number and in size, and that's great. And they're breeding at high levels, and that's reseeding surrounding areas. But unexpected things happen as well. So, for example, we've seen a big increase in lobsters, but the number of brown crabs has decreased. And now when you actually know something about the biology, this is because they are competitors, and the lobsters effectively chase out the brown crabs. And so they've gone somewhere else where there's not so many lobsters. We've also seen, just one other example, brittle stars. So these things sort of, you know, hard to describe, but pretty spectacular things that live on the seabed. In the first sort of 5 or 6 years, their numbers really increased, and, you know, it was really adding to the diversity of the habitat. And then all of a sudden they just disappeared, and we have no idea why. It might be a disease, it might be just a natural cycle. And this is sort of another important thing to sort of bear in mind, that, you know, although we know a lot about the ocean, we know an awful lot more than we used to. We don't know everything, and we can't always predict what will happen. So, yes, certainly important. Right, we're nearly out of time, but I have, where has it gone? One question. We may not have time for everyone to answer this, but what is the one thing the panelists think that we as individuals could do to make a positive difference to the ocean? So try and keep it to a couple of words. Let's start with you, Ishbel, since it's your birthday.
Well, as it's my birthday, if I was in the UK and not Nice, I'd be going to eat a lovely MSc certified seafood dinner. consumer choice is really important in this. You've highlighted it already, Bryce. One of the big kind of transformations is, since I've joined MSC, is really hunting out and looking for that certified. It's a really practical, tangible thing for people to do when they're out for their weekly shop and looking at cans of tuna or their packets of cod on the supermarket shelves. Look for those little eco-labeled products.
Nice plug there, but we'll let you get away with it. Right, Doug, the other birthday celebrant, then we might have to go. So one thing very quickly, if you can.
Well, I'm going to slightly dodge the question. I think we need to all of us learn as much as we possibly can about the ocean. We need to so because with that knowledge, we will know what the right actions are. So if we can all just learn a little bit more than we already do, and I'm not just making a pitch for science funding here. I'm meaning as individuals, as consumers, as a society, learn as much as we can, take an interest in what is, after all, 70% of our planet. We need to know more about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I think that's a great message to finish on. So sorry, we're not going to have a chance to ask the other people because we are out of time. So first of all, can I just give a huge thanks to our speakers, our panelists. I have absolutely loved today's session and learned a lot, even though I think about this stuff all day, every day. There's always more you can learn. So thank you so much. Thank you for the fascinating discussion, answering the questions from both myself and the audience. And thank you to the audience for attending today's event. For those who asked questions, thank you so much. Other than that, thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.